Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for the national anthems of the United States and Canada.
Oh, say can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming,
and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night
that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Oh, Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all thy sons' command. With glowing hearts we see thee rise, the true North, strong and free. From far and wide, oh Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God keep our land glorious and free. Oh Canada, we stand on guard for thee. Oh, Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
Ladies and gentlemen, Bobby Halton.
Before I begin, I'd like to do two quick things. First, at home today, someone couldn't be with us, but he's been a dear friend to me. He's been a dear friend of fire engineering throughout my career. He was given some devastating medical news recently. You all know Harvey Eisner. He's the editor-in-chief of Firehouse magazine. He's a great friend of mine. Firehouse is a wonderful publication, and Harvey's been at the helm of that product for many, many years. He needs your thoughts and prayers. So please keep Harvey in your thoughts the next few days. And Harvey, this one's for you, buddy. So we hope you get well soon, and God bless you. Could I ask all our military members to please stand, and all our former military members to please stand? Anyone who's currently in, and all of those who are retired. Thank you very much. Thank you for your service, and God bless you. And we're very honored to have you with us here today. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I'll begin. So good morning, and welcome back to the 82nd FDIC. To many of us today, it seems like our beloved fire service is like a rudderless aircraft carrier, a daunting and majestic force for good, powerful and beautiful, but it seems as if she's being tossed about by petty internal differences, She's being blown off course by popular hurricane of social trends, and she's being allowed to drift and flounder, vulnerable to attack. So I guess the question this morning I'd like to ask is, what do we need to do to get our fire service back on course? What's needed to reset our compass? What's really missing right now? Is it leadership? No, we have good many leaders and great people at the helm. Is it funding? No, we always seem to find our money. What the cause needs now is far more fundamental, and it's far more basic. Brothers and sisters, the ability of causes, institutions, and programs to succeed has little to do with staffing, it has little to do with equipment, and it has little to do with money. Staffing has little to do with politics, power, or purpose. When we look to history, it's full of courageous battles, waged against staggering odds, conflicts where, despite being outmanned, outgunned, people were able to succeed without the possibility of any success. Some might say it's because the cause was right and just, but to both sides, the cause always appears to be right and just. Some will say it was because of the leaders, but leaders cannot be everywhere a battle's being waged. So what is it that allows the few to triumph, the weak to win, and the humble to be exalted? There's one underlying quality, undeniable quality, to every successful endeavor. The successful all share a common understanding of what success would be. Being successful requires everybody, from the very top to the very bottom, to have that same model of what winning will look like. Without a common vision, we're not united, we're not focused, and we're not poised to win. So that being true, who defines that vision for the fire service today? Does the U.S. Fire Administrator represent that voice? Is it the IAFF General President? Or is it the President of the National Volunteer Fire Council? I don't think any one of those good people are solely responsible for crafting the path and setting the tone for the fire service. Rather, each and every one of us has a responsibility to strive to define the mission, our intention, and our purpose. I think perhaps one of us, and maybe more than one of us, will find that crystallizing vision, that common theme, that irresistible voice that will ring so true and so powerful that we'll all be unresistingly drawn to it, unquestioningly led to embrace it. And make no mistake about it, the fire service has a great many leaders, men and women with passion and vision, who understand what we are doing is connected to a higher power, to a higher moral cause. Our mission and our members are righteous, and they're dedicated. But all this notwithstanding, without a clear and commonly held vision of where we are going, of what our intention is, we are destined to drift, becoming increasingly fragmented, challenged by other public agencies and private organizations. So the question today is, then who among us is going to express that voice? Who is going to express that clarifying and unifying vision? Will it be somebody at the top of the food chain? Not necessarily. These people need to embrace that vision and the cause, but they may not be the authors and the creators. Here's a good example. If I was to ask you, what was the intention of the American Revolutionary War? In 2 seconds, everybody would say, freedom. Freedom, independence from tyranny. America's founding fathers all shared that single intention. They changed the world with that vision. But if I was to ask you, who among our founding fathers best described that goal? Who inspired the colonists to risk all and fight? Who among the founding fathers best expressed that intention? Who would you pick? Now, some would say Washington, others would say Jefferson, some might say Hamilton or Monroe, but you'd all be wrong. Do you know who wrote this brilliant statement? One of the most brilliant statements of all time. He wrote, "Some writers today have confused society with government as to leave little or no distinction between them, whereas they are not only different, but they have different origins. For society is produced by our wants and government by our wickedness." Those words are just as accurate today as they were when they were spoken 230 years ago. Yet most of us don't even know the author's name, although he, more than anyone else, inspired this country to break away from England. He, more than anyone else, was the most important voice in our fight for freedom. He, more than anyone else, described our nation's intention. In fact, his intent was so well expressed, it would lead to our revolution, the end of the rule of the British monarchy, and help start the French Revolution. Okay, maybe you remember this. This was his most famous opening line. These are the times that try men's souls. It's Thomas Paine, of course, from his book, The Crisis. Everybody knows that. You remember Thomas Paine as the man who wrote Common Sense, which defined the foundations of the thoughts of liberty for generations to come. And yet most know absolutely nothing about the man in spite of what he accomplished for mankind. We don't even cover him in our history books. So who was he? Let me tell you a brief history of Tommy Paine. He was born the son of a corset maker in England. He joined the British Navy in his teens. When he returned home, he married his childhood sweetheart and went into his dad's corset business. And arguably, if his wife hadn't died suddenly, we would have never heard of Thomas Paine. Her death left Paine devastated, and his addiction to alcohol quickly dominated his life. He lost his business, he ran through a series of employment failures, and all the time, very, very drunk and very, very angry. You see, Thomas Paine hated government bureaucracy. And in particular, he hated the king. Not the actual person. He hated the concept of a king. Paine passionately understood that no man has any divine right to rule over any other man. Paine eventually found some success, of all things writing campaign speeches and songs. And his life was starting to turn around when into London walks Ben Franklin. It was our Ben Franklin who convinced Tommy Paine to come to the colonies. So in 1774, Paine comes to America, where he becomes the editor-in-chief of Pennsylvania Magazine, where he discovers he faces yet another problem. You see, our wealthy ancestors, they didn't want to break away from England. They simply wanted parity with the British upper class. They had no intention of leaving the comfy little life there. They wanted to be dukes and lords. To Paine's way of thinking, that was no revolution at all. So after the horrible slaughter on April 19, 1774 at Lexington and Concord, Paine decided to up the ante by adding one word to the discussion: independence. A word that no one had dared use before. And because he expressed that intent for freedom so well, the pamphlet Common Sense was thus treasonous, and the king was furious. Immediately, 500,000 copies sold at 2 shillings apiece, which made Tommy Paine a very wealthy man. The book is the book that moved our ancestors, and it defines liberty for the individuals all over the world, whether here or in places such as Afghanistan and Iraq. And when we were in our Revolutionary War and all seemed lost, it was Thomas Paine who wrote the book, The Crisis. This was the book that moved Washington's troops to win the Battle of Trenton, the only other battle other than Tarrytown that we won. After the war, our grateful nation gave Tommy Paine a farm in upstate New York, and he began working as an engineer. Trying to fund that career, he decided to go home to England to try to raise some cash. Unfortunately, that king character was still in power, so Tom decided he should incite a few riots to overthrow the king. Another bad idea. He was immediately indicted for treason, and he had to flee to France. Good timing. You see, the French had just about all they could, as much fun as they could stand with this Louis XVI guy. So guess who became the writer who inspired the French Revolution? Tom Paine. The French loved Thomas Paine so much that he was immediately put on their National Assembly. But soon his life began to take a turn for the worse there. Because you see, the French were out for revenge on the king. They wanted blood, and Paine had never advocated violence. He simply said, all mankind should be set free. Well, in France, they wanted blood. So in the assembly, Tom gets up, demanding that the monarchy go, but not the revenge, and he said these words: I would rather record 1,000 eras dictated by humanity than one of severe justice. He finished with this line: kill the king, but not the man. And for that, Thomas Paine was sentenced to death and taken over to the Luxembourg prison. You can't make this stuff up. Fortunately, the executioner would never come, and 11 months later, Monroe secures his release. Tommy Paine comes home to New York. But because of a book he wrote later on in life, The Age of Reason, which was an attack on organized religion, his enemies branded him an atheist. But like many of our founding fathers, he was not an atheist. He was a deist. Deists believe in God. They just don't believe in formal religion. However, the atheist label stuck. So when he died, he was refused a burial in the local Quaker cemetery. And he was buried on his farm. When anyone asks you about liberty and freedom, when anyone talks about it, they're quoting Thomas Paine. His intent, expressed in his writings, created the breakaway from England for us and the British Reform Act of 1832. His passion helped bring liberty to France. And one would imagine that Thomas Paine would be one of the most hallowed grounds, his gravesite would be one of the most cherished and hallowed grounds in all of America, and we'd be flocking to it all the time. But it's not. Actually, we don't have a clue where Thomas Paine's body is. It gets better. You see, this enemy of Thomas Paine's, Billy Corbett, after seeing the damage the Industrial Revolution did to the British citizens, realized Paine had been right all along and became Paine's biggest fan. In 1817, he decides to come to America, where he immediately goes to the grave of his hero, Tommy Paine. It's this little farm, and he's shocked. And he writes this. He writes, "Paine lies in a little hole in the weeds and grass in an obscure farm in America. There, however, he should not lie much longer, for he belongs to England. His fame and his belonging is the property of England, and if no other country will show that they value that fame, the people of England will." So Cobbett digs up Paine's body and takes it back to England. But he had no money for a monument. So he puts Paine's body under his bed, where it stays till he dies in 1835. His son inherits the body, but shortly thereafter, he loses it. And so we know little of the life of Thomas Paine, the man who wrote the book on liberty and freedom. But we do know that Thomas Paine was a common man, as we are commoners. And yet he defined the intention for the greatest nation in the world. Thomas Paine was not a general, he was not a chief, and he was not an elitist. And yet he unleashed an intention which has become the most irresistible force in the world. Although to practically everyone, he remains unknown. You see, having a clear and unifying vision matters. It ensures success. It defines greatness. It moves nations. At Fire Engineering, our intention was given to us in our very first publication in 1877 by these words which still bind us today. On November 17th, 1877, Y.P. Everett and Clifford Thompson wrote this: "We commence the publication of the Fireman's Journal because we believe such a paper is needed. We shall discuss from an independent standpoint the many weighty topics which are presented for the consideration of firemen from time to time, recognizing that the duties which upon they are called to discharge are among the gravest that fall and most important to any lot of the citizen, calling for an exercise of a high degree of intelligence, courage, skill, fortitude, perseverance, and endurance, only to be found among the highest types of manhood. It shall be our aim to cheer them on in their noble work, to excite them in their honorable rivalry, and to impress them upon the bright examples of so many noble ones who have traveled this same path before them, and to the best extent instruct them on the means of doing their work and bearing their burdens." And so, the mission of fire engineering was summed up in a simple tagline: devoted to the interests of the firemen of the country. We live those words today. It matters not that we have no memory of the men who wrote those words. It matters not that their names are not carved on some stone. It only matters that we remain loyal and devoted to that intention. Now is the time for all firefighters to rise up and rededicate themselves to the mission. To rededicate ourselves to that hallowed ground, that ground to which our honor is bound, that ground to which over the passages of time and the changing fads of society, our common understanding of has eroded. And it is a natural erosion, a predictable erosion, but one that we can stop. And we must stop. before that hallowed ground can hold us no longer. Now is the time to again embrace the commander's intention of the fire service. We must stand together and proclaim that we are devoted to the cause. We must stand together and proclaim that we are committed to the mission. We must stand and rededicate ourselves to the purpose of our work. For the mission of the fire service is not about money. It's not about glory. The mission of the fire service is not about death. And it's not about self-preservation. The mission of the fire service is about answering the highest moral calling that God has asked of any man, that we be our brother's keepers, and that we live a life of sacrifice and devotion to others. Now, like our forefathers before us, in the closing words of the Declaration of Independence, like Thomas Paine, we must also pledge our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor to our intention. We must join with the same reverence as our ancient fall-bearers, the Knights of Malta. The Knights of Malta, when pledging their fidelity to the Lord, said these words on bended knees as the knighting sword gently tapped their shoulders. They would kneel and they said, I pledge to you, Lord, the hours of my days and the use of my death. The hours of my days and the use of my death. Our oaths today are no less binding. They are no less sacred. The fire service today is faced with an unprecedented opportunity to modify the operational fireground behavior of firefighters across North America. But first, we need to embrace our commander's intention. And our commander's intention must state clearly, explicitly clearly, that every community deserves sufficient numbers of well-trained firefighters who will swiftly and effectively respond to our citizens' needs. That every community deserves well-trained firefighters, fire officers who recognize their two most sacred responsibilities. First, the safety of their crews, and second, the successful and professional completion of their work. That every community deserves healthy and well-equipped firefighters who will pledge to persevere, to be courageous, and to endure whatever befalls them. That every community deserves to be protected by men and women of integrity who hold their sacred honor of sacrifice to others above all else. Duty, honor, and country. To this intention, we all must solemnly pledge our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. To cast that intention makes you all remarkable men and women. And I'm humbled and honored to walk amongst you. Thank you very much for this opportunity. God bless you all, and God bless the United States of America.